My name is Dominique and I'm professor and chair in the Department of Life Sciences Communication at the UW-Madison. And hopefully you'll see my face in a second, but it doesn't matter. Right now you see in the lovely building where the Department of Life Sciences Communication is hosted in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. We are excited to have everyone with us today for this special colloquium, which kick off the UW-Madison College of Agriculture and Life Sciences programming in the context of the One Shared Future initiative. One Shared Future initiative is a multi-year effort at UW-Madison to educate the campus and the broader community on the Ho-Chunk Nation and the history it shares with the university. As part of the initiative, schools, colleges, and units across campus are hosting a marker, our Shared Future Heritage Marker, throughout the year and engaging faculty, staff, students, and the community in education activity to spark learning and deepen an understanding of the Ho-Chunk Nation and other regional indigenous communities' history and culture. We will begin today with remarks from the Dean of our college, Kate VandenBosch, who will talk about the heritage markers' meaning and its impact at UW-Madison. We will then turn it over to our speaker, Lincoln Michel, for her talk on media landscape views from a Ho-Chunk journalist. We would like to give a special thank you to the Wisconsin Experience and our Shared Future Heritage Marker Grant, as well as Tom Brown, Michael King, and Heidi Zoll from College of Agriculture of Life Sciences for their help organizing this event. With that, let me introduce the Dean of our college, Kate VandenBosch. Kate VandenBosch became Dean of CAS in March 2012. Prior to that, Kate was a professor of plant biology at the University of Minnesota in St. Paul. In 2001, she became head of the plant biology department there, but took a brief hiatus in 2006 to serve as interim dean of the newly formed College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences. She holds MS and PhD degrees in botany from the University of Massachusetts and spent time at both UW-Madison and the Institute in Great Britain as a postdoc associate. So please let's silently welcome Kate as she introduces our speaker, Lincoln Michel, and what the marker means for UW-Madison. Please keep your mic muted for the remainder of the talks. We will then open our Q&A at the end to facilitate exchanges in the most productive way. Thank you, everyone, and welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Dominique, and good afternoon, everyone. As Dominique has said, I am the Dean of the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences, and I am humbled to begin today's special program by reading our Shared Future Heritage Marker. And just so I don't spoil anything, I'm going to turn off my email so we won't get that annoying bing as we go. So the marker reads as follows. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejop since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. This plaque represents the university's commitment to the Ho-Chunk Nation, and it is traveling around campus to deepen the understanding of the history and culture of regional indigenous people among faculty, staff, and students. In CALS, we are honored to be the host of the plaque until April 7th. Wilfred Cleveland, president of the Ho-Chunk Nation, was quoted as saying that the plaque addresses hard but critical truths. And for most non-Native people, the easiest way around these hard truths is to just ignore the real history of Wisconsin and the real history of the people who first lived here. We cannot and should not take the easy way and ignore history. We need to honor the people who came before us and respect them. We need to value the ground on which we stand and be good stewards of the land. As Chancellor Blank has said, the plaque is a beginning and not an end. We look forward to continuing to learn about the history and the culture of the Ho-Chunk Nation and that of other regional indigenous people. Now, I would like to turn this back over to Dominique Broussard, Chair and Professor of Life Sciences Communication, to introduce our guest speaker today. Dominique?
Thank you, Kate, and thank you for those remarks. It's really my pleasure to introduce Karen Lincoln Michel as speaker for today. Karen is the president of the nonprofit news company Indian Country Today. She's a former reporter, editor, and publisher at publications such as Madison Magazine, the Dallas Morning News, Green Bay Press Gazette, and many more, and an award-winning reporter. In the past, Michelle has served as the president of Native American Journalists Association and Unity Journalists of Color Alliance. We are excited to have her with us today, and I turn the mic and screen over to Karen.
This is great. So I want to say thank you. And first of all, thank you to Professor Dominique Broussard for asking me to speak today. You know, it's really a privilege and an honor to be speaking today, especially in light of and in connection with the Our Shared Future initiative. So, you know, as a Ho-Chunk person, it really feels good to see my tribe recognized in this manner. And I want to elaborate a bit more about that in my remarks. So I'm going to share the screen and begin my presentation. Okay, can you all see that, I hope? Okay, great. Yeah, I look at the marker as being really a huge milestone. And when I think about why I got into journalism, it was to report on communities that are often ignored by the news media. And so I was concerned specifically with the fact that Native Americans were almost always ignored by mainstream society and various institutions. And so the fact that UW-Madison has made this gesture publicly to acknowledge the sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation and then emphasize the fact that the university is built on my Ho-Chunk Nation's ancestral homelands, that really has a special meaning for me. And it makes me think that perhaps times are changing and that maybe mainstream America will realize that indigenous people are still here and we have very much to contribute. So with that, I'll begin. And along those lines, I want to start my talk by taking us back to that day in June of last year when the plaque was dedicated. And I was really fortunate to be able to attend that day for that ceremony that was on Bascom Hill. And the podium was shared by, of course, the chancellor and then the president of the Ho-Chunk Nation. And in this photo on the screen is Aaron Birdbear, who is now the liaison between UW and Wisconsin tribes. So the plaque really recognizes all First Nations of Wisconsin, but I think it also has a positive effect on all Native people who come to campus and see the plaque and read the words on it. So I'm really grateful to CALS for hosting the plaque and kicking things off with such respect and providing a really nice backdrop for my remarks today. Because yeah, I do think that this is really a beginning of recognizing Indigenous peoples in Madison. The name of my talk is Media Landscape, a View from a Ho-Chunk Journalist. I have transitioned into the business side, but I still consider myself a journalist. I have a degree in journalism from Marquette University. And then I was on the board of directors of an organization, news organization called News from Indian Country. And it was published out of northern Wisconsin. So this slide, in it, you'll see one of the offices of the News from Indian Country on the Lakota Indian Reservation in northern Wisconsin. It was one of very few Native-owned newspapers, and it covered a lot of information about Indigenous people in North America. I always had the intention of working there, but then once I graduated from Marquette, then I knew that I really had to get more experience in daily journalism. So, but I'm really grateful to have had that opportunity to serve on the board of directors there, and I learned a lot about issues that were happening in Indian country. So my first, real journalism job was at the La Crosse Tribune, which was not far from my hometown, which is Tomah. It's about 45 miles west of Tomah. And at the time, it was, a newspaper that was a circulation of about 40,000 and covered a lot of territory geographically in southwestern Wisconsin. So this is where I really learned the basics of journalism, and really was a great first place to have a first job in journalism. I covered a variety of beats there. I did police, courts, schools, higher education, city and county government. Also did minority affairs and the environment. So I covered a lot of ground there, and I really had a passion for, finding the story. So I really had a great experience there. I'm going to come back to my time there to talk later about a specific story that I thought would, enlighten you about some science type environmental journalism. But what I will say about this is that it really taught me how important journalists are. I remember after my first week of work there, I had, done so many stories that week, and it was hard to know the right questions to ask, and then all the things that go into researching a story and writing a story on deadline. And some days I wrote 3 stories a day. At the end of that week, I remember looking around the newsroom and thinking, oh my gosh, I really have a lot of respect for these people for what they do day in and day out. And since then, it's just really gotten into my blood as far as being a journalist. So, and one other thing that I would mention about my first job there was I had some really great editors I worked with. And one of them, after maybe 3 weeks or so on the job, he asked me to a working lunch in which he had brought a stack of my stories and said to me that, I've noticed some things that you're doing in your writing that we need to correct. And so he gave me a marked up copy of a lot of my stories, and that really resonated with me and stuck with me. And I've used that throughout my jobs that I've had in coaching other journalists. I went from the La Crosse Tribune to the Dallas Morning News, which was quite a leap for me because it was a big town newspaper and the circulation was about 100,000 daily. I worked with a lot of top-notch people, and I had covered a variety of beats there in Dallas, and among them were, I covered City Hall in a couple of communities in the suburbs. I worked on the weekend, the police beat in Dallas, and then I also worked on general assignments. So there was a wide variety of stories that I covered, and I really wanted to pay attention to how does the news industry, arrive at their news judgment. So that was one of the things that I really looked for when I was there. And also just really the art of storytelling. The Dallas Morning News had some really great writers, and they also had on staff a writing coach. So that gives you an idea of the, how serious they were about the quality of journalism that they, covered every day. So I'm going to come back also to an example later. So after I left the Dallas Morning News, I freelanced for a while because my mother became sick, and so I moved closer to home, and I was able to freelance for a variety of publications. One of them that I will talk just a bit about was with the New York Times Syndicate. I was did some columns for them for a year. I was a paid columnist under a program that was called New American News Service. So it was diverse voices covering different topics, which was great because it set me up for another, my next reporting or my next job. But another story that I did was for the Washington Post about indigenous food sources, which was a great story that I enjoyed covering. For the Chicago Tribune, I did a lot of stories for their real estate section covering the suburbs. And then I did a couple of pieces that for different journals, and one of them being the Columbia Journalism Review. I also wrote stories for a magazine called Native Americas, which was published out of Cornell University, and did some cover stories and some longer form journalism, which I really liked. And from these experiences, I really honed my skills and learned to negotiate as a freelancer. So, I've enjoyed all the beats that I've covered, but I would have to say that probably one of my favorites was covering Wisconsin politics. And that was for the Green Bay Press-Gazette. I covered the Northeastern Wisconsin delegation of the legislature. I covered the governor's office. I covered different agencies within the government. So it was just a great opportunity. There was always a wealth of stories to cover in Madison. So I enjoyed that. And then after I was there for 3 years, and I was promoted to assistant managing editor, and I was moved to Green Bay. And that's really where I learned about management and more of the managerial things. I was also part of the editorial board at the Green Bay Press-Gazette, and I oversaw the opinion page. So, it was just really a lot of different things that I did there. One of the things I will say is that the Green Bay Press-Gazette is owned by the Gannett Company, and Gannett really had a focus on diversity, which I thought was really important. At one point, I was on a company-wide committee for diversity, and I have to say that the company really was responsive to the recommendations that we made as far as diversity in the newsroom and company-wide. So that was really a great experience. I then was promoted to executive editor of the Daily Advertiser in Lafayette, Louisiana. And that's where I got a chance to really run my own newsroom. It was such a valuable experience because throughout my career, I always wanted to create a newsroom and a newsroom culture and a workplace culture that was inclusive to all. And so this was my chance to do that. So I had a staff of about 30, and over a course of time, there were probably about a dozen openings that I had to fill. And I filled 9 of those positions with journalists of color, and they came from all over the country. And so it was really a good opportunity to put into practice some of the things that I had been talking about, not only in my newsroom, but also along the way, I was involved with different organizations, one of them being the Native American Journalists Association, and then an umbrella organization of that was Unity Journalists of Color. And these are nonprofit associations that are devoted to diversity in the newsroom and in news coverage. So this was an opportunity for me to put those into practice, and really, really enjoyed that. Then Madison Magazine, in 2015, I moved from newspapers to magazines, and I didn't think that it was going to be that big of a difference, but it was an adjustment from being in daily journalism to being with a publication that has, it's a monthly, and it still has its daily deadlines. And but I really enjoyed my experience at the magazine, and I focused also on building a strong team. I stepped into the business side of journalism, which, all my career, it was like there's this hard line between the editorial side and the business side. But, you know, over time that has sort of blurred a little bit, and there's been more cooperation. So this was my foray into that. And I discovered that I really loved the business side as well. So that was a great experience for me to be at the magazine. Now I'm at Indian Country Today, and I would say this is where I really feel at home and empowered. And I say that because I started off in journalism thinking that I would be working for Native publications, maybe with different tribes. And then I knew that I needed to get that practical experience. So it was 3 decades later, I've come back to where I wanted to start, which is really addressing Native American audiences. So I'm having that opportunity. Indian Country Today is based out of the Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State. I'm lucky that I get to go remotely there. So I work from Madison, and then am able to, before this travel ban, travel there quite often. And then I have a photo there of the newsroom and the folks who are our reporters and our editor. I wanted to come back and talk a little bit about a couple of stories that I thought might be of interest. One of them being a series on the spearfishing controversy in northern Wisconsin. Again, this was at the La Crosse Tribune, and it was, again, a really great first job to have. And I got a chance to work with some experienced reporters and editors and photographers on this series. I was also fortunate in that I had covered this story for News from Indian Country. And so I had some background information that I was able to share with my team. And I thought that the paper did a really good job of explaining tribal sovereignty and its importance, and that it's an inherent right of tribes to be able to retain certain rights that they negotiated through treaty. So in that sense, I felt that the paper did a really good job of dispelling some myths. We talked to a lot of different people, a lot of different stakeholders in this controversy, and I thought we did a nice job of presenting the points of view from all who were involved. And so another story that I want to talk about, actually this is one story that I'm really proud of. It was actually a series of stories at the Dallas Morning News. The Morning News, really was a great place to bring ideas to your editors, and a lot of times they would make it possible for you to follow a story that you felt passionate about. I was able to cover some stories having to do with amendments to the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. And so there were 4 pieces to that series of stories, and one of them being protections for the Native American Church. Another one was for prisoners' rights. Another one was for sacred sites, and a 4th one was for protections for the possession of eagle feathers. So I was able to do that. And then I also included, I don't have very many photos of myself from that time. And so this is a photo from the directory on the news side, which at that time there were more than 200 editorial staff members at the Dallas Morning News. But the one story that I want to share a little bit more about has to do with something that is sort of reminiscent a little bit of what we're experiencing today with COVID-19. So back in the early 90s, there was, not sure if many of you will remember the story about the hantavirus. So by the time the Dallas Morning News had started covering that story out of, it was the Four Corners area, which was right in Navajo land. So the Four Corners being Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. So there was an outbreak of this mysterious illness that was termed the hantavirus. And so I was really reading our coverage with a lot of interest. And I noticed that they were quoting mostly, healthcare professionals and the Centers for Disease Control, government officials in Arizona, and other health officials, but there was no voice from the Navajo people. So I contacted my editor and I said, hey, I have some sources in that area. If you're interested, maybe you can pass them on to people who are covering the story. And I said, I'm not saying that I need to be involved in the story, but I'm here for you as a resource. And so within 24 hours, they had put me on a plane to New Mexico to cover the story. And it was huge. There were a lot of other news media outlets there, and just sort of converged on the reservation. And a lot of things too that were probably not sensitive to the Navajo people, but I wanted to make sure that I had that level of sensitivity. And so I arrived there and I got a call from my editor on the story, which was the editor of the state and Southwest section of the Dallas Morning News. And he said he wanted me to find a medicine man and get his thoughts on what was happening. And so I thought to myself, he doesn't realize what he's asking me to do. Me as a female from a different tribe, asking a medicine man some questions. But I thought, okay, I'm a professional. I have this assignment and I'm going to do my best. And I ended up finding someone who you would consider a medicine man. He said that he preferred the term healer. And so I was able to find him and interview him and two other people who were religious leaders among the Navajo people. And in talking with them, I found a real interesting story about that there was this prophecy that at one time, the Navajo people were going to be struck with this mysterious illness. And it was going to come at a time when the people had started ignoring their tribal and ancestral teachings. And so in interviewing these different individuals, they were citing examples of how, the language was not being spoken as it once was, that they had ignored the different plants and herbs and things that would help them, promote good health, and that they were turning to Western medicine. And then some other things where they were sort of appropriating different cultural dances and then turning them into social dances. So they had these different examples of what they thought was a kind of turning away from the culture, and that this illness was something that was going to awaken them to that. And so it made a really interesting story, and something that I thought was really sort of enlightening for our readers. So that was a really good example of, I think, when you have diversity on your staff and there are communities that aren't being covered and you have someone from that community, I think it's really great to be able to have that point of reference and someone who has the sources to deal with that story. And one other quick note, I guess I would say on that is, early on, the elders were saying that they thought the illness had something to do with the fact that there were so many pinon nuts that had been a big crop that year. And people just kind of laughed at that. But in the end, researchers found that it was caused by rodents, and that the rodents were eating pinon nuts, and then people were gathering them, and then there was that contact with that virus. So anyway, I just thought that was an important note to mention. But this is the last thing that I'm going to mention before we go into the Q&A. And this is from my time at Madison Magazine. And just since January, we started this monthly column, it's called Sense of Place. And my idea behind that was to interview people from diverse backgrounds in Madison and ask them, get to know them a little bit through Q&A, but also what they think of Madison and what is their place that they found in Madison. So I think it's a really interesting way to find out about, people in the community. And I think it goes back again to the fact that, when you have a diverse staff, that you can really get those types of innovative things, coverage into your news organization. So that's one thing that I think I'm really proud of, that I've brought to Madison Magazine, is just sort of covering diverse communities and the importance of that. And so I know that we are on a time schedule here. So with that, I think I'm going to just turn it back over to Dominique, and we'll find out what we can do about the Q&A portion. So thank you very much. I really am honored to have been able to talk with you today.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you for that wonderful talk. I'm sure everybody really appreciated have your insight and your trajectory and what everyone can do, to make sure we respect and represent adequately all diverse voices in the media.